Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Let's maybe wait a few more minutes to let everybody join us. Um, yeah, maybe we can wait until 4 and 4:03, let's say. Okay, so hello again, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Guia Baggi, and I'll be moderating the event today. This webinar has been organized by the Earth Journalism Network, which is a program of the Global Media Development Organization Internews. The Earth Journalism Network, or EJN, has a mission to improve the quality and quantity of journalism around environment. And it does this by helping journalists around the world report on climate change, biodiversity and conservation, pollution, and other issues by providing story grants, training, fellowships, and other kind of supports. EGN is also a community of more than 35,000 journalists in about 180 countries. If you are not a member yet and you'd like to be one, please visit earthjournalism.net to register. By registering, you'll be the first to hear about story grants, fellowships, and events like this webinar. This webinar in particular is organized as part of EJN's Mediterranean Media Initiative, which was launched in March 2022, with the aim of providing journalists and media organizations from the region with resources to enhance their reporting on marine issues, and it's currently turning to a close. But of course, there are other projects dedicated to the ocean, and we will tell you more about later. In this webinar, we will explore the challenges of protecting one of the world's most overfished sea, the Mediterranean. And our speakers will walk us through the current level of marine protection, how marine protected areas and fisheries can coexist, and the challenges and opportunities of involving local communities in conservation efforts. We will discuss this with Dr. Susan Gallon, a passionate scientist and conservationist who, after years of working on top marine predators, has more recently dedicated her expertise to marine protected areas. Since January 2019, she has been serving as the scientific manager for MedPan, the network of marine protected areas in the Mediterranean. Susan is committed to advancing scientific understanding, fostering responsible research practices, and applying scientific knowledge for the benefit of both society and the planet. Zafer Kizilkaya, a professional conservation photographer and marine conservationist with over a decade of experience working on tropical marine conservation projects and for National Geographic assignments. In 2012, he co-founded the Mediterranean Conservation Society and has since dedicated his career to establishing marine protected areas in the Eastern Mediterranean. For his efforts, he received several prestigious awards, including the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2023 and the Mediterranean Blue Wave Award in 2025 for establishing 350 square kilometers of new highly marine protected areas in Turkey. His most recent work focuses on replicating Gokova Bay MPA model in other parts of Turkey and beyond, as well as on endangered species such as the Mediterranean monk seal and critical marine habitats. Then we have Dr. Antonio Di Franco, a senior researcher at the Sezione Zoologica Anton Dohrn in Palermo, Italy, whose work focuses on marine conservation, fish ecology, and small-scale fisheries, as well as on helping connect science with real-world policy. Antonio has published 90-plus scientific papers and leads several international projects, including MAPA FishMed. Dr. Kate Hogg, a postdoctoral researcher at the Sezione Zoologica Anton Dohrn in Palermo and a freelance consultant. Her work focuses on the role of stakeholders in marine conservation, helping connect people, science, and policy to improve how marine resources are managed and protected. And finally, Jeremy Wilkes, a journalist covering climate change, energy, ocean, space, science, and technology for Euronews. In 2025, he won the European Meteorological Society's Communicating Weather and Climate Award. He hosted 3 seasons of the Ocean Calls podcast, focused on European ocean issues from marine protected areas to undersea cables, and presented award-winning monthly Climate Now series. In 2025, he also produced a 6-part series on food fraud called The Food Detectives. Following presentations from our speakers, we'll be opening it up to audience questions. And for those of you who are watching this live, if there's something that you'd like to ask any of our speakers, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom at the bottom of your screen and not the chat box. We will be monitoring the Q&A feature, but we will not be monitoring the chat. So please only put questions in the Q&A. And additionally, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch or catch any parts you missed on our website in the next few days. And attendees will receive an email with the link. We will also want to highlight one opportunity that might interest you, our Ocean Conference 2026 fellowships. It's an in-person fellowships program that will support selected journalists to attend and report from our Ocean Conference scheduled for June 16 to 18, 2026 in Mombasa, Kenya. It's open to all journalists reporting from a coastal country. And in April, our Biodiversity Story Grant will also open, and it welcomes speeches on marine biodiversity issues as well. But yeah, so now without further ado, I'm turning it over to our first speakers. So we have Susan, followed by Zafir.
Thank you, Gia. So I'm just going to share my screen, and good afternoon all. All good? So the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea, as many of you will know, is one of the top hotspots that is under a lot of pressure those days. So sorry, perfect. So it's one of the world's biodiversity hotspots with around 15,000 islands, there's canyons, there's seamounts, and while it represents less than 1% of the global ocean surface, it holds more than 20% of the world-known marine species. And around a quarter of the species are only found in the Mediterranean. And this hotspot is under a lot of pressure. While only representing less than 1% of the ocean, it holds a third of the global maritime traffic. It's the first tourist destination in the world, and over 80% of marine pollution in the Mediterranean come from land-based sources. And for example, there's around 700 tons of plastic waste that enters the Mediterranean every day. As we heard already, it's a very overexploited sea with many fish population decreasing worryingly. And finally, it's feeling drastic impacts of climate change as the Mediterranean is warming 20% faster than the rest of the globe. So some of the key examples of effect of this global warming is acidification or marine heat wave, for example. So to face those many challenges in the Mediterranean, MPAs have been increasingly seen as one of the tools to address some of those threats. And as a reminder, marine protected areas are clear defined zones at sea with clear boundaries. They are managed areas with often rules to protect habitat, species, and ecological processes. There are tools to restore biodiversity, support fishery, and build resilience to climate change. And there are also places that can still allow sustainable human activities, depending on their level of protection. However, MPAs are sometimes misunderstood, and they are not automatically no-take zone. Some allow, many activities, but also they are not just paper park, but they do require real management and enforcement to be effective. They are not areas that exclude people. Many involve and benefit local communities. And finally, they are not a single solution to all ocean problems. They are just one of the tools that can be used. So when MPAs are effective, they are great because they benefit the conservation of important habitat, species, and ecosystems. When an effective MPA have a good level of protection, then it can create spillover, and the spillover effect in a marine protected area refers to the movement of marine life, such as fish or larvae, from a protected area into surrounding non-protected area. And the conservation of important habitat, species, and ecosystem, and the spillover effect will in turn improve the local economy and the well-being of local population. It's also improved the resilience, as healthier ecosystems have a stronger recovery capacity. They are also known as real-world laboratories for science, where researchers can better understand how marine ecosystems function and respond to pressure. And finally, MPAs are great outreach tools to showcase what nature can look like when left undisturbed. So every 5 years, MedPan and the SPARAC, which is the Regional Activity Center of Specially Protected Area of the Barcelona Convention, carry out an assessment of Mediterranean marine protected area, where we stand to identify gaps and needs to fill and identify success stories to replicate throughout the Mediterranean. So this is ongoing work just now for the 2025 MPA status, but I can already share with you today that just now the coverage of MPAs in the Med represents still less than 9% of the Mediterranean surface. Please remember that the 30 by 30 target, so 30% of MPA by 2030, is 30%. So we're still far from this goal. Also, the cumulative surface of no-go, no-take, and no-fishing zone, which correspond to kind of fully protected area, represent less than 1% of the surface of the Mediterranean. Again, as you may know, the EU is calling for 10% of strict protection in EU waters. Another important numbers to have in mind is that more than 97% of the existing marine protected area in the Mediterranean are found in EU water. So a clear imbalance of protection throughout the region. And finally, so there's around 1,100 MPA in total in the Mediterranean. A quarter of those are fully or partially implemented the management plan. So you see on this map, the different MPA shown, as I say, more than 1,000 MPA. And there's 3 types of marine protected area. The one that are designed at the national level. So those are countries that are officially declared MPA. And there are 84 types of nationally designed MPA in the Mediterranean. 84. Some comes with regulation on fishing, some don't. Then you have Marine Natura 2000 sites. Those are the sites that have been proposed by member states at the European Commission. And it's at the EU level that those are approved and adopted. Those don't come with any type of regulation once designated, but they come with commitments to protect key habitat and species at the EU level. And then there's one international agreement in the Mediterranean Sea, the Pelagos Agreement, that is an MPA that has been designed and is managed by three countries, France, Italy, and Monaco. So when we carry out this status, we also collect data on management that provide valuable insight into the resources, governance, and management practices that influence MPA effectiveness. So these figures represent the survey result for the 12 enabling conditions that have been identified in the scientific literature that significantly contribute to MPA effectiveness. And it's about, does MPA have enough equipment? Do they have enough budget? Do they have staff? Do they monitor? Do they have surveillance? How do they involve the stakeholders? And you can see that there's a lot of orange and red because the situation is that, as I mentioned, there's still like a lot of means to reach this target. So again, it was a very quick overview, but all the results from the MPA, the 2025 MPA status, is going to be released in the spring 2026. So please follow us to have the full number and report on those data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing with us this sneak peek of your work. Yeah, Zafar, please go ahead with your presentation.
Hello. Thank you, Susan. And we are very much looking forward to the MPA status report coming soon. And let's talk about protection. What means protected? So let me. So this is the less than 9% Susan mentioned. 8.23% of the Mediterranean Sea is protected on the paper. This is whole protected areas. But the real protected areas, which means fully protected areas means there is no fishing activities within those areas, is less than 1% and it's only 0.06%, which is almost nothing. Even within these fully protected areas, the effective management is, maybe 18 to 20%. So technically, we don't protect anywhere in Mediterranean, right? So let's come to the Eastern Mediterranean side. We have special environment protection areas established by the Minister of Environment in Turkey, but there is no marine consideration within those areas. So we started to work with Gökova Bay. I'm going to give you some graphics later. Why we are working in Gökova? Because it's a refuge for endangered species, Mediterranean monk seals, sandbar sharks, many other species. So this is from my slide collection from 1990 and the same place in 2008. So in 18 years, what happened? The entire bottom just turned into a after nuclear war, mad looking, no fish, no algae, nothing. So this is and then we got a kind of curiosity what's happening in Mediterranean. So in 2008, we had a big project starting from Spain all the way to eastern part of Turkey. How is the Mediterranean protected areas and non-protected areas are doing? The number one indicator to showing the health of any rocky reef is the amount of fish per square meter. So look at the, Tavalore, Medes, Portofino at the beginning of the graph. They're almost 100-gram fish per square meter. When you come all the way to end, the Gökova, there were only 4-gram fish per square meter in Gökova Bay in 2008, had the least fish. So we started from a scratch. So what we are trying to do, you see, this is past all the oceans, and now it's present. If we really fully protect it with good enforcement, we are getting closer to the pristine state in the historical stage. And if you highly protect, lightly protect, and minimally protect it, you see lightly and minimally protected almost doesn't give any benefit for biodiversity other than small fishes. So in 2010, convincing more than 200 fishers, their families, government, all the other stakeholders, we established 6 no-take zones plus 300 square kilometers where industrial fishing is forbidden, right? There is no pursuing, no trawling in it. But who's going to protect it? So Coast Guard was so busy with stopping illegal human trafficking and saving lives of all these refugees, we decided to establish our own marine ranger system. So still, this is the only marine ranger system on the planet implemented by a civil organization, non-governmental organizations. So we have 8 boats, almost 10 rangers, and we have female rangers too. So they are all full-time, but they work so by heart. It's not a kind of full-time job. This is a kind of lifestyle for our rangers. That's why it is incomparable by any enforcement done by government. We do it for as a life and death concern because we want to do this. And we have special softwares in our ranger's hand. So they have a menu, they can select all kinds of events, and the real time we can follow up from our computers, which gives us all the locations of where illegal fishing activities are concentrating. So we are changing our all patrolling schemes and our ranger stations locations. So this is the efficiency of how we are doing good on this and how many different cases of illegal fishing activities over week, month, and years. So this is before and after shot for you. It was 2012 when the areas have been established, all those nets, ghost nets, all those fishing lines. And after cleaning all those things, and after 5 years of very strict enforcement, exactly the same place turned into this, right? Exactly the same place, it's the same angle I took the picture before. So when there's no fishing, the fishes are coming. When there's no fishing, sponges can grow up. So this is just 5 years of strict enforcement. So that makes a huge difference. So there is a concept for a fish where he or she cannot see any hook, any spear, so any fishing net. And the sponge communities are coming back. And just within 5 years, the fish biomass increased from 4 grams per square meter to almost 70. Now it's above 100 grams. But most important part is this dark part where apex predators makes up more than 65% of the whole fish biomass. But then comes the rising sea temperatures. So we have temperature loggers 5 to 4, surface to 40 meters. And look at that. At 2015, the thermocline was at 22 meters, sorry. And in 2016, thermocline down to 27. In 2017, below 35. Now it is below 40. There is no thermocline anymore. This brought amazing number of invasive species. This is a day catch of a fisherman. Only this scorpion fish is local. The rest 270 fish are all invasive. Most of them are edible. We disseminate this paper to fishers. They record every single fish they catch, including all the invasives, and we pay 10 euros per this paper. So we have an idea over the years how much the stock of invasive species has been increasing in the fisheries part. And we also work with the chefs, and there's also culinary academy in Istanbul. There's a competition for invasive species recipes. Right now we work with more than 29 restaurants. We bought fish from local fishers, all invasive, and we sold it to the restaurants. And so far, we sold 20 tons of invasive species, and the demand is so high, we cannot catch it up. So there's a good market, and there's a good, income for the small-scale fishers. Some fishers are making more than 40% of their livelihood only from, a couple of invasive species. According to our data of 10 years of data, invasive species biomass increased 2.1% every year, right? So every year there's a steady increase of 2%. The good news is in no fishing zones, well-protected areas, there is 15.5% fewer invasive species. That means the apex predators living in that protected areas just whether preying on them or just keeping them out of the protected areas territorially. So that means protected areas, fully protected areas, are increasing the resilience of, marine environment. So we worked on a couple of, critically endangered species, but we use different, technologies. We set up 4K camera systems. There's, solar panels, all these computers, cameras, and everything. We never go. These are 4K infrared cameras. There's no light in this, and this is real time cameras. So this all recording all the day. So, all the scratches are very important to identify every single individual. We have an artificial intelligence program for monk seals, and you will see for the sharks soon. And so we can, identify every single monk seal coming into our caves. So only in the Gökova Bay, we have 19 monk seal we identified so far by our AI, software. And in one cave, we have 7 monk seals sleeping together. This is the highest number, and there is one pup just suckling her mom. So that means protected areas and enforcement really works. So, in 6 years ago, we found a cave. It's a beautiful pool inside, but there is no dry ledge. We got the permission from Ministry of Environment and build a platform there from sandbanks. And final structure is this, and we put a camera there. Just 3 months later, one big male and juvenile female start using this. In fact, this is the only cave monk seals use whole year round. In the natural caves, they never come in summertime. But this cave has the highest property index among monk seal population. So same thing we do for the sharks. We have places where even swimming is forbidden in the zonation. So we have similar solar panels, cameras, computers, and everything. So we have sandbar sharks are coming. These are also real-time cameras. And this is not from Pacific. This is not from Azores. This is not from Cocos. This is just Eastern Mediterranean. We have so many sharks are coming whole year round. So protected means real protected. We have cameras, we have rangers protecting this, and this is our AI. So our AI is just recording every single shark and identifies the same shark if it comes, again. So we have a list of, Excel list of sharks. So every shark has a kind of code. And now we have new cameras we are establishing in the system, very high, resolution, 4K. And now the system is just automatically records the shark existence and individuals. The good things about small-scale fisheries, the spillover effect. Used to be these ladies, we have a big community of fisher women. They are catching all the small fishes of the same species. Now they are catching the bigger ones. So there is a 300% income raise for 90 fishing families. There is no such an example anywhere else in Mediterranean. These numbers are given by them. They're telling that they're making that much money. So, 300% income since the protected areas established. So this is a day catch from one fisherwoman with her son. She told me even when she was a kid, there was no such a fishery in the bay. So that means spillover effect and keeping the industrial fishing away really supports sustainable fishing in the MPA. And another thing is, this is a picture from Gökova, one of the fish restaurant. Look at the diversity of local fishes. If you go somewhere else in Turkey, you can only see cultured fish, sea bass and sea bream. So this is really important for local economy because diversity is so high, all kinds of commercial fishes are still there. So we just replicated this with a bigger project started in 2019 under the funding of Endangered Landscape and Seascape program. Now we are in 4 different marine protected areas, Datça Bozburun, Dalyan Köyceğiz, Göcek, and Mediterranean Fund are supporting this project currently, and we are just, replicating the same thing there. So this is, risky job. Enforcement done by ourselves is risky. Our rangers were shot, our rangers were beaten. It's not something easy. But we have a very close cooperation with Coast Guard and Ministry of Agriculture, and we have very high-tech camera systems in our boats and everything. So if we stop patrolling, the government could not do it daily, weekly, maybe monthly. And without enforcement, all these illegal commercial vessels, especially bottom trawlers, will definitely come back to the bay. And decades of recovery is just going to, disappear in very, unestimated time. So we made this model. If we stop patrolling, in the next 3 years, there will be a little bit of increase in the, MPA benefit from the fisheries side because, all these illegal fishers will come and plunder the fish stocks. But later, 10 years later, the loss will be more than $20 million without enforcement. So without enforcement, it is meaningless to talk about marine protection. If you cannot secure the enforcement, all our marine protected areas will be paper parks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zafir. Great closing line, I would say. So before moving to our next speakers, I just want to briefly remind you to ask questions in the Q&A feature, basically. So now the floor is yours, Antonio and Kate.
Thank you very much, Guya. Thank you very much for the invitation, and hello, everyone. Just sharing the screen. Please let me know if you can see. Okay, good. So I will briefly present you the results of this study, which was called MOPA-FISH MED, that we concluded last year. And it was funded by the European Commission, and more specifically through SINEA, which is an European agency. So the overall aim was to investigate the interplay between MPAs and fishery, with the final aim to try to support managers and policymakers as they oversee this continuing expansion of MPAs in the EU waters, as already Suzanne mentioned, with this 30 by 30 target. More specifically, there were 3 goals. The first one was to characterize the status of the Mediterranean MPAs. The second one was to assess the fishing activity inside and around marine protected areas. And the last one was to assess the effect of MPA implementation on fisheries. So for what concerned the first goal, we combined some different methods in order to try to have an overview of the status of MPAs in both the Mediterranean and Black Sea, the European part at least. So we collected the existing information from different databases in order to compile a list of the EU, Mediterranean and Black Sea MPAs that were relevant to this project. So of course, with a specific focus on fisheries. We administered a questionnaire online to identify MPA managers. We translated this in 8 languages and distributed all around the European Med and Black Sea in order to try to collect key information about the status of the MPA. Then we performed also a literature review, both scientific and gray, in order to identify evidence about the status of monitoring assessment in MPAs. And finally, we used information coming from this questionnaire in order to assign each MPA to a stage of establishment and level of protection. So the level of protection was already covered by Suzanne and Zafer. We will focus a little bit more on the stage of establishment. So the first important element was that we, combining all this information, like about different databases, we come up with a number of 949 MPAs relevant to our study in the European and Mediterranean Black Sea. Of course, this number is a little bit different from what Suzanne showed, but this was that one was referred to the entire Mediterranean Sea. But an important element was that we found that not all of these are actually MPAs. They are mostly designations, meaning that some of these MPA basically overlap physically among them. And we saw that 43% of these MPA actually have some degree of overlap. And in some cases, they were overlapping more than 90%. So in this case, we consider that 2 MPAs overlapping more than 90% were actually at same sites. So in the end, just filtering based on this, we came down to a number of 878 unique sites. So you see that in the end, number need to be actually assessed very carefully in order to understand which is the status. So the information coming from the questionnaire suggested that most of the MPA, the vast majority, are governed by public administration, but not only. 62% of the MPA reported some interaction between fishers and MPA managements. 33 reported a lack of capacity in order to manage MPA. So this tells us that the number that we see at the beginning, we should just cut off basically 1/3 of this. And that 63% of the MPA reported to have some form of management plan, but in half of the case, this was implemented. Another important element is the one related to the stage of establishment. We use the information coming from the MPA guide, which is a science-based policy framework, policy relevant framework in order to classify MPA, for instance, based on stage of establishment. As you can see here on the right, the stage of establishment could be like proposed, designated, implemented, or the more advanced one, which is actually actively managed. And overall, we found that only 44% of all the sites that we consider in the Mediterranean Black Sea were actually implemented or actively managed. And there is a great imbalance between different categories of MPAs. Susanne already mentioned this, the difference between Natura 2000 and nationally established MPAs. For instance, for what considered nationally established MPAs, 76% of these MPA were either implemented or actively managed, while this percentage was dropping to 9% in terms of Natura 2000 sites. So again, as Zafar already mentioned, we should not just look at the overall number, but then we need to consider how many of these are actually, for instance, fully protected or highly protected. You already mentioned this, but there is also this other layer that we should consider. How many of these are actually implemented or actively managed? For what concerns the monitoring, actually we collected information through literature review and through the questionnaire, and we saw that only 60% of the MPA investigated have some information about monitoring assessment of different elements. And more specifically, most of this information was related to ecological environmental monitoring, while there was very scarce information about all the socioeconomic setting of the MPAs, which is a key element in order to inform management. As I said, the second specific goal of this study was to try to characterize the fishing activities carried out inside and around the MPAs. In order to do so, again, we combined multiple approaches. We performed again a review of the scientific literature. We collected the regional fisheries data from different sources, and also we collected the valuable data on seabed characteristics in order to assess on which habitat fisheries was ongoing. So the literature review clearly highlighed a large knowledge gap in terms of fishing activities in MPAs, and mostly there was virtual absence of information on fishing footprint and impact on habitat. In this perspective, there were no data from before and after the MPA implementation in order to assess which was the displacement induced by MPA implementation on fisheries. But we also noticed that fishing activities was much higher inside Natura 2000 site compared to nationally designated MPAs, but also unprotected area in some cases. But we need to consider that these data are mostly referred to vessels which are larger than 15 meters. So basically, we miss the most of the information coming from a small-scale fishery sector because, as is for now, European regulation actually pose an obligation only to large-scale fish vessels to report their catches and their position through some automatic tracking devices. And we actually found that towed gears, which are the one that potentially could induce the most of damages to the environment, were operating also inside some MPAs, and they were producing 20% of the total catches across all types of MPAs. As I said, the last goal was to try to assess which was the response of fishery activities to MPA implementation. And in order to do so, in this case, we focus on 5 case studies I will show you later. And we used both information coming from IES and BMS, which are information about the position, the tracking of the vessel, in order to quantify fishing effort in time and space. But we also use a participatory mapping approach to try to reconstruct a small-scale fishing effort from the past and the present, because as I told you, there is no specific information coming from tracking devices on small-scale fisheries. And finally, we surveyed small-scale fisheries, large-scale fisheries, and key informant in order to assess their perception of governance, management, and socioeconomic impact, ecological impact of the MPAs. So as I said, we focus on 5 case studies. One is in the Black Sea or Potamo, and the other 4 are in the Mediterranean. One in France, Banyuls, 2 in Italy, Egadi and Torre, and 1 in Greece, Chiaro. So all of them are very heterogeneous in terms of environmental and also social and governance features. So what are we presenting? It's actually capturing like a large amount of variability of different settings. So we found that large-scale fisheries showed an effort concentration in area relatively close to fully protected area boundaries, more specifically between around 5 kilometers and 15 kilometers, in line with what is called fishing the line. So this tendency of fisheries to move close to the MPA in order to exploit, for instance, spillover effect that Susanne already mentioned. For what concerns small-scale fisheries, actually, from this assessment of this participatory mapping exercise, we saw that they've been displaced from previously fished grounds that then became MPAs, and fishing activity has been moved to either to partially protected areas or close to the FPA that been implemented, or also in unprotected areas outside the MPA along the coastline. So stakeholders reported that they perceive the importance of MPA for conservation purposes, but at the same time, they said that they did not feel to be properly engaged in decision-making participatory process in most of the cases, and felt also the MPAs were not delivering what was expected, either in terms of ecological term and also in social economic term. And actually, they also reported to, in most cases, to have failed to adapt to the change induced by MPAs. So overall, to conclude, we produce 9 recommendations that you can find in a booklet that we produced for this project, and is freely available, that were like centered around 4 main pillars. The first one was about the improvement of the status and the planning, more specifically in terms of level of enforcement, distribution of habitat when MPA are created, and on the specific regulation that can allow or not human use in partially protected area. The second one was about informed effective management, again reinforcing the need to have a proper management plan and to have proper resources to implement sound and effective management. The third one was about transparent and inclusive conservation, because, as we said, it's very important to try to engage stakeholders through the entire process, while sometimes this actually is not being done like properly in all the cases. And the last one was about the possibility to account for changes and be adapting the responses, because as Zafer mentioned, this is not static, but it's like a dynamic process, because through also climate change, everything is changing. Stocks can be redistributed in space, they can change species. And so actually managers need to be ready to adapt their management measures in order to face these changes and be able to always deliver significant ecological and social benefits. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thank you for also highlighting this final point about like more adaptive kind of management, also because of climate change. So now it's time for our last final presentation. So just want to remind for last time to post your question in the Q&A feature. And the floor is yours, Jeremy.
Thanks very much, Gary. So I think somebody else is going to control the slides for me. There we go. Marvelous. Hi, everybody. So I'm a journalist for Euronews and made a series of podcasts called Ocean Calls, which you can still listen to, although we've actually stopped producing that. But we made 3 seasons of that, and I also covered ocean issues a lot related to climate change, but also Earth observation in a series I made called Space as well in the past. I kind of have an idea I kind of have a vague idea of who the audience is and who you are. I think that you're all journalists and you're probably freelancers and you're pitching stories, and I've kind of created my presentation with that logic in mind. So I hope that is helpful. So my first slide is really about let's say I've got 5 tips for you. My first slide is my first tip for you, which is get to know the terminology. And I've put it against a black background with this kind of dark greeny blue there because it is a bit of a murky world when you get into this. It's difficult sometimes when you get into a new subject and you're expected to suddenly get launched into it and become an expert very quickly. It's difficult to see your way around the different terminology. We've got marine protected areas in the middle there, but there are plenty of words. 30 by 30 you'll hear people talking about. You'll hear this awful word stakeholders, which is one of those awful words because it doesn't really mean anything. It means the people who are generally concerned by this, but I mean a list of stakeholders is normally helpful if you're talking to somebody who says stakeholders to you. But there's lots of kind of concepts. There are illegal fishing, there's unregulated fishing, there's all kinds of things that you need to get your head around. So just do a bit of homework on that, because it's like any subject. It's got its own world to it, and your job is to try and translate this to the wider public. And most of them have certainly not heard of MPAs, and they haven't heard of 30 by 30, and they couldn't really define sustainability or biodiversity particularly well. Let's move on to the next slide. And if you can, you've got budget like me here, go there and go and see what it's like. I would absolutely love to come and see what Zafar was just talking about. I have been to some of the MPAs on the Spanish and French coast. If you have the budget, if you can get a grant, if you can get some kind of financing, go there and speak to the local people. And there's no substitute for that as a journalist. You're what else can you do? I suppose you can speak to people on the phone and you can try and get a picture of it, but literally going there is extremely helpful because all of these MPAs are different. They're there for different reasons. The communities around them behave differently. The activity that actually happens there versus what's supposed to happen there is different as well. So consider that there's a great diversity to these things. They're not all the same. And if you can get the chance, the money, just to go down, even for a few hours. I was filming here, this is in Marseille, filming a story about the long-term effects of marine heat waves with a team from Septentrion Environment with a scientist called Tristan Estac. And we had a great morning out, filmed the whole thing in half a day, and it was great. Let's go on to slide number 3, which is, I suppose, my follow-up to slide number 2 of, if you don't know, then find somebody who does. And that's always what I do as a journalist. This is 4 people I've picked out who've helped me enormously in my coverage of MPA stories in the past and have helped me to understand context. And you can contact them too, and you find your local scientists, speak to the people on this panel, send them a LinkedIn invitation, try and get 15 minutes on the phone with them, ask them for contacts and people who can help you. Top left is Jean-Pierre Gattuso, who's from the CNRS, and he works in Villefranche-sur-Mer in the south of France. I first met him in 2009. I think he's possibly retired now, but he and I still email each other with contacts, with ideas for stories and things. Those contacts that I made back in 2009 continue. I got his name from a science papers that he was writing. He was also an IPCC contributor at the time. He put me in touch with Quim Garabau, who I think that's how you say it. Below, I've never managed to say his surname correctly, despite speaking to him many, many times and meeting him many times. He's a Spanish researcher, Catalan researcher, very specifically. And we did an amazing shoot with him in the Medis Island MPA area just off the coast of Catalonia. He put me in touch with Tomás Flacigiani, who some of you will know as well, who, again, is a wealth of knowledge and knows tons and tons of people. And then, absolute coincidence, my boss on Ocean Calls happens to be called Sophie Claudet, and Joachim Claudet is her brother. And she said, yeah, my brother's kind of a big deal in the MPA world. And we were like, oh, yeah, he's kind of famous. Can you get us in touch with him? He's fantastic too. Not easy to get these people on the phone. Some of them, like Quim Garabau, he goes diving. He doesn't answer emails or his phone. But if you can get them, do get them and try and establish a rapport with them, because, your local biodiversity MPA scientist will tell you the truth as well as they know it, about the situation that's going on there. And they'll know a person who knows a person who did a great presentation about X, Y, and Z. So when you're covering these topics in the science world, definitely make yourself a little friendly network of scientists. Let's go on to slide number 4. When I'm doing these kinds of stories, I think it's really important when you're covering marine conservation in general to think about your platforms. I'm sure all of you are very, very aware of this, but here we've got different kinds of platforms. And top left is a screenshot from a recording of our podcast. Here I'm talking about eating seaweed. We recorded it for a podcast that's 25 minutes long. We would record about 55 minutes to an hour worth of conversation. We'd always cast it. So we'd have like one female speaker, one male speaker. We'd speak to maybe 4 or 5 different people before we decided who were going to be the characters in our podcast. And I think podcasting works very well for marine conservation issues because they're often quite narrow topics. And you can get a reasonable amount of information across in 25 minutes to half an hour. The contrast to that would be bottom left, Ocean, which is a series presented by Denis Loctier, who's Franco-Russian. He's doing a piece to camera while diving, which is the kind of cool thing you can do if you're Denis. That's a big budget show. We spend a lot of money on that. It's got all the drones and all that going off on the boats. And it's a fun way to make programs. But I don't think you need to be doing marine conservation with spending that much money unless you've got an extraordinarily strong story. Just to the right of that, you can see this not that optimistic headline on the 30 by 30 goals. That's a text article I wrote earlier this year. I got an interview with the European Commissioner for Fisheries, and I got in the interview very, very easily. And again, this is to underline that you can get access if you are using the right moments. We knew that there was the EU Ocean Week coming up, and I just contacted the spokesperson for fisheries, and they said, yeah, we'd love to do an interview. Well, would you like to speak to the commissioner? He's available tomorrow. And I could get into a conversation with him incredibly quickly and get great quotes, and the editor was very, very happy. Of course, that's not going to work in TV particularly well. It's not going to be easy to turn it into a podcast, but you can write it up as a news article very well. On the right-hand side, I think a lot of the time we talk about data, and that's what Antonio was talking about there. There's a lot of kind of data and numbers, and these sort of Instagram stories suit that well. Here you've got screenshot featuring a lot of images of Cyril Fourneris, who works on our Road to Green series, who kind of is the key presenter for that show, and he's showing maps and graphics and data and numbers, as well as sort of driving emotion and reaction, which is what you need for good Instagram stories. But think about your formats a lot when you're pitching to editors, because different things fit different sorts of formats, and not everything really makes a great video, to be absolutely honest. Which kind of brings me through to slide number 5, which is actually a slide that I had from a presentation about climate change journalism, but I think it's exactly the same here, which is that my tip would be to think about what matters to audiences. What matters to audiences? I mean, general people who consume news, people who are consuming magazines, local radio, who are reading local newspapers, national newspapers. What are the concerns that the European public in general would have, not just the European public either? And I think that the stories that make people move and make people take action are often those related to health and wealth, their own health and wealth. They think of themselves, am I going to get healthier or less healthy? Am I going to have enough to eat or not enough to eat? Am I going to get wealthier or less wealthy? All things you can frame within this. Somebody asked me once, well, what about wars? And I thought, well, that is absolutely a health and wealth story. So when imagine you've got a great marine conservation story that you want to try and pitch to an editor, maybe you need to think about it within that sort of prism when you're pitching it and saying, I'll just run through some examples that came to me. Some wealth ones, for example, we've talked about that there's a kind of local community tourism boost from MPAs. And so you could manage to get an article in the local written press, local websites, local broadcast news in some way around that angle. There's another wealth one would be the boost to artisanal fishermen who are allowed to fish in those areas. and how they feel about the creation of MPAs, and arguments around some of the economic aspects of it that could help local businesses, particularly, you know, what Zafar was talking about. There's angles there to do with money and to do with businesses that you could actually can resonate with audiences quite well. I think there are whole health and wealth stories to be done around food security, and particularly food security now. We know that everybody is concerned about food security over the next year and a half or so because of the war. And so, you know, MPAs probably have a role there. You can probably manage to pitch an MPA story that works because you're going to hide the MPA a bit further down, but you still get it in there. And then I think, you know, the health story, we've already covered it. Zafar covered it fantastically about the ecosystem recovery. It's brilliant. It's great news. It's wonderful. And there, obviously, the family of seals is just killer story because it's cute. We can relate to them. Seals are super cute. Why would you not want to know about that? And you kind of sell it as an exclusive, you know, and it's going to resonate with people because they're going to want to talk about it. Guess what they did? They built a little place and the family of seals turned up, biodiversity, etc., etc. We can make a world a better place. And audiences love that. And I think, again, a final one, which everybody's familiar with, the idea that if you're improving the kind of bathing conditions, then it's great for holidaymakers, great for locals. They can enjoy the place a bit more. So it'll be a healthier place to be. So keeping those sorts of concepts in your mind is good because the press releases, the governments, they will be hammering you with all of this stuff written around the outside, which makes no sense to anybody. Things like sustainability, which it is almost a useless word now. Talking about, for example, circular economy, again, almost a useless concept. Nobody has got an actual circular economy I can go and see and visit. Can I buy one? I don't know. I don't think so. It doesn't really mean anything apart from to people in ivory towers in capitals of Europe. You've got to think as a journalist, what means something to the people consuming this news? Well, are they going to be able to eat better? Are they going to live a better life? Is it going to be nicer where they are? Are they going to be richer or poorer in different ways? Think about it like that. And I think you can manage to make great marine conservation stories that resonate with audiences and help build a political support that you and I know that we want in order to have more of those areas covered. By the way, Zoe, I totally love the question. And that's like a really, really cool thing as well. That's great. I have answers for that. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing all the possible story angles and tips with our audience. And it's time now to move into the Q&A portion of the event. I can see already there are a couple of questions in the chat, like in the Q&A feature. So I remember once again to put the questions in the Q&A feature. I see this one from Priyank Patil from India. I think this one probably is for Zafar. Basically, the question is, are species shifting their ranges due to warming waters? And how does that complicate fisheries management? What are the biggest policy gaps preventing effective fisheries management in this sea, in the Mediterranean Sea? Zafar, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I would love to. Well, the main problem about invasive species is enlargement and deepening of Suez Canal 6 years ago. Before, there were less invasive species could ended up in Mediterranean Sea because there's a natural flow, and the Red Sea is 17 centimeters higher than Mediterranean Sea. Right now, that highway was much bigger and much deeper, and more species are ended up. But after they ended up, the main problem is the temperature, because they are well equipped as a tropical species. No, in Mediterranean species can compete with any tropical species because they're so well adapted, competing with thousands of species where they came. And when the temperatures seawater temperatures are getting higher, not at the surface, but in the deeper vertical part, so their range has been expanding. They have been spawning more than 3-4 times in a year, and they're just grazing everything and pushing all the local species out, and they're just covering all the ecosystem. So technically, before 2050, Eastern Mediterranean will turn into a tropical sea. So the only methodology that we could do for the edible species is just, catching and eating them, putting them into an economy and culinary. And the other thing is about what is wrong with the fisheries management, right? We are too many in Mediterranean Sea. That's the most overfished sea that we are living on the side. Thousands of years, people have been fishing in the sea, but this technological improvements, all those very high subsidies by EU, and increasing, geometrically increasing number of recreational fishers, which have very high quality equipment and everything. So there is less and less fish, and it's very difficult to manage those altogether. And again, we are coming at the end of the day, enforcement. So we should enforce that they couldn't come here, they couldn't catch more than 5 kilos per fish per person in Turkish regulations, in different countries, all different. So it's all about enforcement and all about education. But, right now, the major threat for Mediterranean, overfishing are the recreational fishers who have very high capability of gears, and they're selling their fish illegally, and they're competing with small-scale fishers.
Thank you. I think, Jeremy, you want to add something about this?
Yeah, different really, but thank you, Priyank, for the question. You're totally right, and you've hit on a story. And if you are a journalist, then I think you should pursue this, or there are other journalists listening to do with, and we have covered this in the past on Euronews, are the MPAs in the right place? Are you going to end up protecting the wrong part of the ocean? Now, in the Mediterranean, I would argue it's not quite so relevant, but we did this story about the Atlantic, about fisheries policy, MPAs, etc., because of the changes related to climate change. Are you actually going to be protecting the right area? It's a great political story and a really, really strong angle. If you have the right publication that wants to take it, then it's a cool story.
Thank you. Antonio or Kate, do you also want to add something? Otherwise, I think there is another question for you in the chat.
Yeah, maybe I can add
I think
something there.
Susan had something to add to that question, right, Susan?
Yes. Please go ahead, Susan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Susan
thank you.
also.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No, it's fine. I totally agree with Zafer, what's happening in MPAs, and also with Jeremy. And just briefly to say that climate change is reshaping where species live. As Zafer mentioned, they move and there's new species coming, while fishery management is mainly based on past distribution. And this is the first big mismatch. All the decision we take those days is based on a lot of historical data. I'm talking, at the Mediterranean level. So, this is not working, and there's very weak integration of climate change into fishery management. They don't move at the same pace, policy and, the need to adapt to climate change. And then, as Afam mentioned, overfishing is massive in the Mediterranean, a very, very problematic and illegal fishing. So I would say, those are the main, kind of ingredient that made this topic very difficult in the Mediterranean.
Thank you.
I'd like to pick up on something also that Zafer said, because he mentioned recreational fishes, and we don't often talk about recreational fishes because for scientists, I don't know, for some reason, they're perhaps a bit scary because there's so many of them. They're very difficult to find. They're very, very difficult to research. They're not like commercial fishes where you can go to the port, you find them, they're licensed, their names, the names of their boat, everybody's registered, everybody's paying their taxes. Recreational fishers could come from Madrid and they go recreational fishing in the south of Spain, in close to marine protected areas, and there is very little ability to track them, to contact them, to know what they're doing, and to be able to monitor how much they're catching, what species they're catching. And then there are a big portion of recreational fishers that then sell their catch illegally. But there are some researchers that have been brave enough to tackle this topic, who are showing that recreational fishers are actually causing a significant amount more damage, or catching a significantly larger proportion of fish than commercial fishers, small scale or large scale fishers. And we're not taking that into sufficient account when we are also talking about marine protected areas, because it's kind of like a black box that we don't talk about, that we can't consider. And so when we're making our fisheries management policies or our MPA management policies, we are missing this huge sector of society who are benefiting from fisheries resources, and we're missing the data on that. So when we're setting our management plans for the MPA or for fisheries, we're actually missing a huge chunk of data that we need to have. And I think that that's also a very interesting story that needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is something I heard a lot from small-scale fishers in the past year, actually. So I think it's definitely something to explore more. Antonio, do you want to add something? Otherwise, we can move to the other questions in the chat.
I can add something to the last part of the question, which are the gaps preventing effective fishery management, also following up on what Zafar and Kate said. Yes, I think that we're also missing a lot of information about small-scale fisheries, meaning small-scale fisheries in the Med is the most common type of fishery that we have. It represents around 80% of all the commercial fishing vessels operating. It's historically and socially extremely relevant for the culture of Mediterranean Sea, besides, of course, food provisioning. But we don't have very detailed information about how and where the vessel operates, for instance. That's why we try to reconstruct through some participatory mapping exercise done with the fishers. But we don't have specific information through tracking devices as they do in large-scale fisheries, at least until 2030, when the EU should start to implement also this on small-scale fisheries. And we don't have very detailed information about the catches. So this is something that I think we should try to address better. I mean, we, the European Union, mostly in this case, through funding specific program like they do for large-scale fisheries. And we don't have specific information also about the status of coastal fish stock, because many times when you see, when you hear, I don't know, a certain percentage of stock are overexploited. This basically refers to large stocks which are exploited by large-scale fisheries, but we don't know almost anything of what's happening close to the coast, which is the area most in line with the marine protected areas, because as you saw also from many of the map, they're distributed along the coast. So yes, I think that we need to gather more information about recreational and small-scale fisheries in order also to try to better design effective management strategies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is something also that came up in the previous webinar we organized. This question, I think it's related to the presentation you did before. It's from Abbas Mouat. Basically, he is saying you have identified 949 marine protected areas distributed across the European zones of the Mediterranean, but none in the southern Mediterranean, while countries like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Egypt have numerous MPAs. Is it due to a lack of information, or do these southern Mediterranean countries not prioritize the management of these areas, which are so crucial for biodiversity protection? What needs to be done? What actions should be considered to increase the number of MPAs, especially in the southern Mediterranean, and ensure their effective management?
Okay. Yeah, the reason actually is probably more silly than this, because it's the fact that the project was specifically funded in order to assess European seas. So we didn't gather specific information from MPAs coming from North Africa in this case. But I guess that this links also with the presentation that Susan gave at the beginning. I mean, the vast majority of MPAs in the Mediterranean coming from the EU, but I don't remember the exact figure, but something around like 97% or something like that in terms of coverage. So yes, I think there is a lag, a gap in this case, like from the North Africa, for instance, in terms of MPA implementations. Also, I don't know, we didn't assess the status of implementation, but as far as I know, in some specific case, even if MPAs are being designed, they are not actively implemented. So this makes the situation even more complicated.
Kate or Susan, do you want to add something about this question?
I can add something. Yeah, just as Antonio mentioned, 97% of the MPA are in EU waters. So that's where there's the most, story coming from. However, there are MPAs in the south, and there are great MPAs. And, we heard today about Zafer, in Turkey. So there's an amazing, case study in non-EU countries, especially as often they lack resources, funding, and they need to find their own way to make the MPA effective. And those are amazing stories, the one that Zafer mentioned today. Lots of co-management involving, local actors to make it work, in often difficult environment. So they're all committed to 30% by 2030. They all committed, those non-EU countries. How are they going to achieve that? In some countries, they're also lacking kind of regulation or laws to pass new MPAs. So those are, slow process. And then there's also in this 30 by 30 target, there's the over-effective conservation measure. So, non-MPA, but other area that may contribute to reach this 2030 target. So this may be a way that some non-EU country will also reach those targets, and it might be to do with some fishery measure that they will take, or any other measure that they may identify. But yeah, again, there's less MPA in the south, but there's great case study in the south to showcase how it can work, hand in hand for the protection of the Med.
Thank you, Susan. If Kate, you don't want to add anything, or Jeremy, maybe we can move to this other question. I think it's for Zafer. From Nusaiba Asenin, Mr. Kigitalkaya, based on your experience in Gokova Bay, how can scientific monitoring, particularly ecological and ecotoxicological indicators, support and improve decision-making in co-managed marine protected areas? If you want also, you can contact the person who is asking this by email. But yeah, Zafer, if you have anything you want to share now, go ahead.
Sure. Let me give a very fast answer. We have been monitoring since 2013 fish biomass, macroalgae, invertebrate, sharks, small seals, and everything. And according to our monitoring data, which we will share with the Minister of Agriculture and Minister of Environment, this is how we upscale the Gokova Bay in other MPAs. So we show them, okay, look at that. This is this big. And, we need this size of different habitats to be protected also in other areas that we could replicate then. So this helps a lot, this scientific monitoring reports, when we present it to the government, okay, this area should be this big and there should be another one ecologically connected. So, once you have solid, positive, monitoring data showing the improvement of MPAs and the spillover effect, also in the fisheries side, the landings of, Gokova Bay small-scale fishers have been increasing all the time. So it's still not come to the, equilibrium, it's still going up. They have been catching more and more fish. So that means as the year passes, the enforcement spillover effect all supporting the small-scale fishers. So government is very keen on replicating in other areas, just supporting the, local small-scale fishers. And there's also one more question about the guitar fish, elasmo branches. So Our MPA is one of the last strongholds of angel sharks, Squatina species, and also other Rhinabatos species. So once it's been protected and there's no fisheries, there's so many of them coming. I didn't mention any numbers about the elasmobranchs in our area, angel sharks and Rhinabatos. There's so many. It's unbelievable. It's just, if you don't let anybody come there to fish, they just, all of a sudden, their population, their, appearance has been increasing. So then, we need no fishing zones representing all different type of habitats: muddy bottom, sandy bottom, seagrass, rocky areas, and walls. And this should be kind of a, ecologically close to each other. This is a kind of success recipe. So it shouldn't be only seagrass. It shouldn't be only muddy bottom. It should be all kinds of habitats because they're, just supporting each other. 3 years ago, we confiscated an illegal fishing net in one of our MPA, right? Which is not known by sharks, but we found 20 juvenile sandbar sharks. They were all alive. We released them. So they came for feeding in that MPA, even though their breeding site is somewhere else. They came to this MPA for feeding because there are a lot of fish here too. So that's why we need ecologically connected corridors, between each no fishing zones, and representativeness of all different habitats will definitely bring the shark species back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, basically the question about this endangered species called the white-nosed gatorfish was given the slow growth, late maturity, and low fecundity of elasmobranch. How realistic is population recovery in such an intensely fished ecosystem? Is there anyone who wants to say something about this question? Otherwise, I think we have another one, and then I will move to a final round of final considerations, basically, from all of you.
If I could just answer Priyank's question about the slow growing species, and with also to kind of reiterate what Zafar said, for highly mobile species like these and slow growing species, marine protected areas are kind of given a bit of a bad name because people suggest that they wouldn't be so beneficial for these slow growing and especially for these highly mobile species. But there are ways that marine protected areas can be very effective for these species, especially if you have a specifically designed network of marine protected areas. And there aren't very many specific networks, but the Eastern Tropical Landscape, which is, goes Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Colombia, is a great example. We're nowhere near the Mediterranean with this one. But that was a network of MPAs that was specifically designed to protect highly mobile shark species. So in this way, marine protected areas can be very, very beneficial because you need to ensure that the areas are protecting every habitat type that this species needs during its life history. Like Zafar said, they need a feeding ground, they need a nursery ground, they need like a pupping ground, a breeding ground. And you have to have these corridors, you have to have a network of MPAs that can protect these highly mobile or slow growing species much better than just very small MPAs that aren't connected or not designed for specific species or in mind. So that's what I wanted to add to that one. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, they're asking for your email address. We will share speakers' contact details basically after the webinar and also the presentations. So just one last question from the Q&A feature, and then we will close up the webinar with a final round of reflections. So basically, this question is how our sound become louder than government in the conservation. Sorry. I lost it. Okay, sorry about that. I cannot find it anymore. Maybe it was deleted. So yeah, let's say that it's better maybe to wrap up, and so I'd like to ask all of our speakers basically to give a final reflection or comment on this topic before we go. We also be pasting the link to a feedback survey in the chat, so we'd love to know from all of you basically if you enjoyed this webinar and if you have any suggestions for future events. But yeah, let's start with this final round of comments. Maybe we can start from Jeremy, then Kate, Antonio, Zafer, and Susan.
Sure, I'll kind of carry on in my thread of talking about the work of a journalist because that's what I can talk about with a certain level of authority. And I would say that the thing to keep in mind if you're reporting on these things is, as usual, don't trust official sources, don't trust the official data. Do speak to the NGOs and get their point of view. Do speak to the fishers as well. Don't leave them out of the picture, and do consider there are different types of fisher organizations. I, in general, have had more feedback on ocean conservation issues in my career as a journalist than many other topics that I've covered, actually. More audience feedback, more contact from PRs, etc. There's a lot of people who are interested in this, and it's important to listen to a lot of voices before starting to make up your mind. I do tend to trust scientists mostly, but I say be wary of lots and lots of other things. And then when you're thinking about pitching stories and you want newsrooms to pay attention, biodiversity, environment, marine conservation is not high on newsrooms' agenda. That probably won't change. What is high on their agenda most of the time is what's local to them, what's in their garden, what's at the beach down the road, what's next door, what they feel is kind of going to resonate with the people who are reading their publication. If it's a local news organization, you really need to think local all of the time. And I think local news is actually the most trusted and most powerful, actually, when it comes to action. So consider, if you're trying to get your story across, you've got an angle, you want to get a story published, look for local all of the time. Be careful about who you trust. Don't just believe the headline numbers from the UN, and think, how can I flip this story around and challenge better? Because I think the more we challenge better, it's what's happening in climate change journalism now. The kind of thing that was talked about earlier in one of the questions that we didn't get to, about giving the Mediterranean this kind of status as a person. Those kinds of things are catchy, and newsrooms like them. We've made stories about rivers becoming people, by the way. And challenging journalism, which has an attitude, also works. It's very different to local journalism, but challenging journalism, which is attacking and looking for the truth that's being hidden by governments and corporations and large institutional bodies, is a great way to go if you can do it. So both of those things, I would say, keep it local, or if not, then go for those high level court cases, all that kind of stuff. That really, really works. And Zoe, if you want to contact me, then I think that your story about should the Mediterranean become a person is probably a story that our Euronews Green team would be interested in if you haven't contacted them already.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just for reference, I will read Zoe a message. So basically, we are working on an initiative calling for the legally binding declaration of the rights of the Mediterranean bioregion, which would eventually grant Mediterranean a personhood in law and with it protect the whole basin. We would be delighted to cooperate with all of you if this resonates with you and your work. I didn't read it before because it was not really a question. So, but by the way, it's great that you mentioned it.
It's a story.
So we move to Kate.
Well, I mean, I think there's so many things that I could say that I'm at a loss of what to say, to be honest. I think that often we like to focus on the doom of gloom of things and what's not working. And sometimes it's just a little bit miserable, because there are really good things happening. And I have been very guilty of criticizing MPAs. My job as a researcher means that I have to really look critically at what's being done and what's not being done. But at the end of the day, if we criticize something so much that it won't exist anymore, and then we have wonderful examples of marine protected areas which are doing really amazing things, and these ones should be really showcased and promoted, and we have so much to learn from these examples. It's very easy to say we're so far away from the 30-30 target that things are going quite wrong with the approaches that they're taking for us to reach those targets. Perhaps they're going to expand MPAs rather than really think about whether those MPAs are in the right place or the expansion will have any benefit whatsoever. But I think that if we are very negative about everything, then we'll miss the point about how beneficial these marine protected areas could be and how much we actually need them. So I think that that's kind of my final thought, is that we really need to be proud of what we've achieved, but know that we need to be doing more and doing better.
Thank you so much. Yes, please, if you want, Antonio, or otherwise we can move to Zafir and Susan. Please go ahead.
Yes, we'll add just something about what Katie said. I think that in the Mediterranean, but this is probably like more in general, that we need to have clear that the challenge is not just to design more marine protected area, but also to make sure that the ones that we have are actually working. Because I mean, there are like many cases that have been shown today that can show a disconnect between protection on paper and protection on practice. But actually, MPA just need like the basic condition to deliver significant effect. And we know that these are like sufficient capacity in terms of financial and human resources, adequate management and enforcement. This is a word that is coming a lot today, and I think it's very, very important. And this is not just a technical issue, because I mean, if the MPAs do not deliver, we risk creating a shattered expectation and losing the trust and support by stakeholders that are the one on which MPAs are actually depending on. So I think that, as Katie said, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, we have like plenty of examples today. Zafer showed the example from Turkey, but there are like some others around the Med and more in general globally of MPA that work. So I think that we need to get this right to make this MPA work, because in this way they can deliver actually significant outcomes that can be benefiting both the environment and the people. So in this sense, I think that the journalism can play a very key role, because it can help like shifting the conversation from how much we protect this aerial target that is always coming on like 30 by 30 to how well we protect this. So I think that is where we should be going.
Thank you so much. Zafir and Susan, do you want to add something about this?
I can add a few words. So very tough days are waiting the area, right? Geopolitically, the whole world is just boiling, but the Mediterranean is very much closer to the, arena. And almost 100% Mediterranean countries are depending on the energy coming from Gulf states and other areas, which has all around big conflicts. I heard yesterday half of the Dutch bottom trawling fleet stopped fishing because of the fuel prices. So, and it seems that this crisis is going to have more time in upcoming months, and the fuel prices will a lot more way to go up. That means entire industrial fleets will be unfeasible to go out for fishing. So we will see whether the governments will subsidize more them to go out for fishing, or we will have a kind of a time period. Fisheries is going to collapse because of the fuel prices. So this also affects the priority of all governments. So who will care about the marine protected areas and enforcement? Well, there will be huge crisis on, fertilizers for growing crops, for supplying enough fish for the public. So this is a kind of very uncertain times waiting for all of us, but especially when you are looking from the point of conservation, especially marine protected areas, these are going to be really tough days waiting for us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a very important point, I think. An interesting angle, I think, also to explore for journalists attending this webinar, maybe like the impact of war on conservation, and especially marine conservation.
We
Susan,
actually
do you
did,
want?
we did a story about this in the Black Sea, about the impacts of the war on the acoustic situation for the species. But there's definitely an angle there around, could it be an unexpected boost? Strangely, because there isn't the industrial fishing practice going on. There's tons of cool angles around that. Actually, I've just seen the story. Thank you, Zafar. Good one.
Yeah, Susan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I was just thinking that Zafar is a great communicator, and my advice would be for the journalists to go and interview him. But more generally, I'm very aligned with what Kate and Antonio just mentioned, that marine protected area are complex, and often there's lots of shortcuts. We hear Kate mentioned them. MPA don't work. MPA are not protected. And yes, they are not, the solution, but they are far from being meaningless. And even when they are not yet fully effective, just by being designated, sometimes it already plays an important role, preventing harmful coastal development, for example, to regulate other activities such as anchoring. And they provide a framework on which stronger protection can be built, and it takes time. And MPAs, in some way, are still a very young tools, to protect the environment. So what really makes the difference, it's what comes next: management, funding, capacity, engagement. And just remind that behind every MPA, there are managers such as Zafar and practitioners that are working every day, often with very limited resources, to turn protection on paper into real impact in the water. And just so you know, in the Mediterranean, one management unit, so it's the team that is in charge of the management of an MPA, can manage between 1 MPA and 63 MPA, managing the crazy job they have to do. So the real question is not do whether MPA work or not, but under what condition they can work, and whether we are all collectively, because we are all responsible there. I just mentioned, 80% of the pollution comes from the land. They deal with it, they pick it up on the beach. So we need to all collectively, provide the means to make them effective. So I think that for the journalists, your role is essential to bring us together and to help move the conversation beyond those headlines, and to really, show that, how can those challenges and solution can work in the Mediterranean altogether. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of food for thoughts, I would say. So, and that's our time for today. So I'd like to thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and in particular our speakers. As a reminder, you will receive a link to the webinar recording via email in the next few days, which will also include speaker presentations and contact information. We'd also please ask you to fill out the survey in the chat to provide feedback on this event. And yeah, thank you again for joining, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks all. Bye bye.